Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Today, Oscar asks Mimi anything. In this episode, I take over as host of the Sifu Mimi Chan podcast and ask Mimi all of my burning questions. Hear her advice on relationships, why she's unreasonable, the secret history of her super skills, and more. Maybe too much more. Now, if you enjoy the Sifu Mimi Chan show, please rate her podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support Mimi with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work she does, you can become a patron of the show by visiting her website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show.
Hello, Oscar.
Hey, Mimi, how are you?
I think this is pretty funny because we are normally recording video in addition to audio, but because we're only recording audio today, let's face it, because I'm not having it. It's not a camera day. I feel like it's a little bit more relaxed and that this has the potential to be very silly.
The potential to be silly is always there. What I am really appreciative of is that I didn't have to do any makeup.
Or hair.
No makeup, no hair. And that's a win for me. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, for our listeners that are wondering what the heck this episode is about, Oscar and I are trying to come up with some interesting, like, when we do record, ways to kind of have us where we're not just sitting awkwardly talking to one another. And so right now we are trying out off air. And if you want to envision us, listeners, because you've seen our studio, you've seen the home gym, we are literally stretching right now.
Yeah. So I think I don't know if it'll come across on the mic, but you might hear some shuffling, but that's moving different positions. We can't just stay in like a 90-90 one side for the full interview. But I do like your idea that this is a test run and you can ask your audience, oh, would they want to see this?
Because right now I'm doing some very exciting knee cars.
Controlled articular rotations of the knee. Wow.
Yeah. And so for listeners that have maybe followed us on 4C Fit Fu, or perhaps listen to some of my other podcasts with fitness pros, in addition to yourself, you do know that we are really big on joint mobility.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit too much to our detriment.
Yeah, a little obsessive as in, oh yeah, I'm going to work out today, but instead I'm going to do my cars for 45 minutes. Oh, out of time. Guess I won't be working out.
Okay, this isn't part of what I thought we were going to talk about, but I will say that some of the best workouts that I've ever done have started with literally just laying on the floor and saying, dear God, I do not want to do this. I guess I'll roll around a little bit and then see what happens. And then over time, it usually leads to a pretty good training session, but sometimes it could lead to, you know what? I fell asleep and I got a nap in, and that was nice.
See, now I wish that I could nap pre-workout or whatever, like you just mentioned, but I'm not a huge napper. Now, I'm not saying I've never taken a nap, but generally speaking, if the sunlight is out, I am awake.
Right. And for me, if the sunlight is out or the sunlight is not, the sunlight is in, the sunlight is out, the sunlight is sideways, I can take a nap.
Sideways?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Sideways would be like, what, 3 o'clock?
I don't know.
Maybe
I was just
closer
thinking,
to 5.
I was thinking sunlight in, sunlight out, sunlight, whatever.
Wouldn't that be more front, back, side to side?
Yeah, very good point. Okay, so here's the thing. As you know, I consume a lot of podcasts.
No.
Audiobooks, articles, and there are many times where after reading or listening to something, I think, wow, that is really interesting. I wonder what Mimi thinks about that. And usually I'm listening when I'm working out or cleaning the kitchen or driving. And when the thought comes in my head, hey, let me bring it up to Mimi, you're usually trying to improve the future of children's education or something. Or you're running while and so it's like, I don't really want to bother you with this question of, here's what I thought about while learning how to juggle while you're like, saving the world.
Okay.
And wait a second. And also, on the flip side of that, I think also that there's times where you want to ask me about something and maybe I'm not in the, so it kind of goes both ways. And I thought, well, how can I make sure that I get these questions to Mimi? And the way is, let's make it efficient and make a podcast out of it.
This is pretty bad because I think it's going to give listeners this sense of, don't you guys live together and work together? And literally, I think we spend at least, how many hours a day would you say we spend together? 20? What's the average?
Probably like 19 to 22.
And they're going to say, what, these two don't communicate? We are very busy humans, though. So oftentimes we work side by side on the computer, or I'm in my studio, which is where I do the recordings and I take meetings and things like that. And you're in the outside office, which is where I used to have set up. So, and sometimes we even text one another. I message on the laptops. Yeah. So,
Oscar, check the laundry. I'm on a call with a senator, and I'm like, but I was trying to balance this stick on my hand for 20 minutes. All right, that's fine.
You know what? That's ridiculous. You do a lot of very productive things, and you have clients and whatnot. So I like that you are trying to make me look like some sort of world savior while you're, juggling, which I will say that has happened. I have been doing something really crazy, in the midst of legislation, and I look over and you're juggling, but that's okay. I think that you have a much better work-play balance than I do, and I actually aspire to be a lot more like you.
Well, so this is not really it's sort of like Ask Mimi Anything, but it's really Oscar gets to ask Mimi anything. So you know what? Let's start there with something that I think, especially during the pandemic and after, you hear a lot of I need this work-life balance. And what are your thoughts on that? This is not a question that I have prepared, but since you brought it up, what are your thoughts on what is appropriate and not appropriate for work-life balance? Because I think we have different views on it, and I don't know if either one is wrong. It depends on if it works for you. But what's your thoughts on it?
So to be clear, you mean what I consider work-life balance? If I say, well, in the morning, I took 3, MUV calls, and then I worked on my podcast, and then I went to Kung Fu and did all the classes. And then I came home and we had dinner and an hour of TV. That day, to me, doesn't feel as work-life balance as I would like. So are you saying, what's the ratio to what I consider to be a balance of work versus play or relaxation? Or
yeah, you can answer it that way. Well, what would you think is appropriate? Maybe not appropriate is not the right word. What would you strive for?
That's a great way to put it. So I honestly think if we're breaking it down to on a weekly basis instead of days of the week, because all of us could have days where it's no, this has to happen. We have to drop the car off at the mechanic. Then we have to do this. Then we have to do that, right? That day may offset, but if you could offset that with the next day having a half day of time for yourself. So I think on a weekly basis, I think 60% work productivity to 40% self-care and play, as I say play because I think about you juggling and, balancing a stick or hanging on the monkey bars or trying to, what is it called? Slackline outside, like all these things that you just sort of enjoy and you don't have some major goal to it, but you're just enjoying that moment, or even just sitting on the couch and watching TV. Not that, like, reading a book. I feel like that would be pretty good. And as I get older, I would hope that that percentage keeps shifting, right? So that eventually it's 20% work and 80%, play kind of thing. Like, so as time goes on, so like current where I'm at, I mean, ideally it would be like 80-20 now where I'm playing, but I think it's because of the amount of commitment I've made to so many facets of my life. Like, if I could get to a 60-40, I think maybe even, dare I say, the 60 would be even more productive because I would be so supercharged. But because I've been always able to operate on like 5% of downtime, 95% productivity, that I'm able to just kind of push through. But that's certainly catching up with me.
Right. So ideally, now at your age, you would say 60-40, 60% being work, 40% being life, really more life meaning not work. That would be ideal.
I think that would be ideal. Am I doing that? Absolutely not.
Right. I didn't. I was under no impression that you were. I think 80-20 is what I'm striving for now and forever.
You mean 80% play?
Yes. Because I don't think that there's ever a time where I don't want to not be doing something that is productive, like, even training clients. And, sometimes I complain like, oh, I got to wake up early. Damn it. But, or teaching Kung Fu classes, things like that. Things that inevitably make other people's lives better. That is 20% forever, from now till the day that I die, is how I think of it. Mm-hmm. Is what I would want. What I think what you do really well is you are what I would call a maximizer, or maybe maximizer, or you're just able to accomplish a lot in a certain amount of time. So if I had your skills and I was thinking of my 80-20, my 20%, I would still accomplish more than most people, is the way I look at it.
Yeah.
So
I think the way I look at that 60% as well is that I have to also, on some level, enjoy that. So we've always had the gift, or I've always had the gift, apology, because you did have a job where you sold your soul to the devil at one moment.
When you're saying I have the gift, I'm thinking of the book, The Power. I'm like, oh shit. About to get electrocuted.
Okay, so tangent, The Power. Go on, us. Can you quickly?
It's just a book. Quick synopsis. It's a book where, let's say it's present day time, women have suddenly gotten this power where it starts off where they're able to like change the radio station with the special electricity to then being able to do like a shock someone, almost like when you rub your feet on the carpet and then shock someone, static shock, to almost being able to fully electrocute people. And the power shifts all the dynamics that we've had throughout human history of men having power over women. It shifts to women having power over men. And the book is told as a researcher 1,000 years from this present day, looking back and going, oh, these women, as soon as they got the power, they did all the things to men that were being done to them. And
that book is Naomi Alderman, and you had recommended that to me, which I believe is also now an Amazon show, which we haven't watched yet. But yeah.
Anyway, so when you said you've always had the gift, I was like, oh boy, here we go.
of having an occupation that was never truly what I think conventionally people thought of as work. But because of that, people often outside looking in would think that I have this flexibility of not a quote unquote real job. Whereas when you're a business owner and when you are the one invested in that business, as in it's your family business, it's actually, I think, a little bit worse in terms of commitment level, right? In terms of like, of how much you take that home with you. I know that some people in a regular 9-to-5 job do take their work home, but I think that I think the danger of being able to draw boundaries is greater when you are so invested, right? So that becomes like where there's bleed over. But I think because I've had the gift of always having something I, at the end of the day, enjoy, that 60 to me is like, okay, well, even if I'm tired and I don't want to go to class, once I'm there, I mean, for the most part, it's like, I know I feel, it's like when people go to class, I feel better after kind of thing. So, but yeah, I don't know that. I know I will eventually get to 80-20 in my mind, but yeah, I'm definitely not there yet. I guess because I feel like I need that 60% of time to accomplish what I want to accomplish. And I don't feel that I have enough time yet.
Okay. So there's a couple ways we can go. All of this, by the way, you know that I took notes that I wanted to ask you. I haven't used any of them. But, okay. So let me go with something that I have written down and then come back to another thought that just sparked, which is, I think of this as a super skill, which is logistics and planning that you have. But I don't really believe it's a genetic gift. Like, I don't believe, oh, Mimi just has this predetermined genetic gift for logistics and planning. I think it's a skill, which means that you acquired it, built it, honed it. So I'm interested. And I think it would be beneficial maybe if you could find a way to explain how you acquired it, how you honed it, how you built it.
Well, I mean, to give you the perfect example right now, I can't even help myself because normally when I'm on a podcast, I'm really mostly engaged in the guest, and occasionally I'll like quickly jot down a show note while I'm recording because I don't have the luxury of having a producer be there to write show notes while I'm recording and be on air and do all the things. So I'm kind of an all-in-one. I'm very fortunate for Jake, who helps me edit, but normally his strength is not necessarily like, oh, let me find all these things during the podcast to write down as a link or something. So even while you and I were talking just now, I'm making my show note card and I'm like, oh, The Power by Naomi. I want to make sure that that's there so that I don't have to go back and do that later. So I think I always say the skills that I have acquired is from necessity. So I learned to edit because I was too impatient to wait around for other people that could help me edit or didn't have the budget to hire someone to edit, right? Or maybe the pre-genetic thing I have is impatience, right? So as an impatient person, I go to class and think, wow, this way of doing this takes so much longer than it should. There has to be a faster way. Let me see how I can do that. The very first time I can recall thinking back in even my childhood and going to like a kung fu competition, for example, and just waiting around all day, I thought, this is really inefficient. And it just seems like such a waste of time because as you look around the room, not everyone's working the whole time. And I think I just maybe have kind of the ability to observe a lot of what's going on around me. And in my brain, it makes me go, okay, so how can we do that better? And so then when I go to do something, for example, my first tournament, I think about all of the experiences at other events I've had and what things I complained about as a competitor. And then I bring that to the table. And then each time I automatically practiced making templates and then pulling up those templates and improving. So even when I was like, I remember this in like 6th grade and we would go on, a weekend trip or something. I had handwritten checklists, but they were templates and I would handwrite them, right? Before we had computers that we could just like copy paste whatever. I would make sure anytime I forgot something on a trip, I would add it when I got home, as soon as I got home, so that I wouldn't forget for next time. So it's like, I think I just don't like being unprepared. I'm an impatient person. I like things to go very smoothly. And that may also be attributed to the fact that my home was slightly chaotic because neither of my parents are really that organized. And maybe it was just my averse reaction to that. So, you know, as my psychologist would be like, so this goes back to your parents.
So in your answer, this is, I don't know what the right word is, but almost like meta. In your answer, it showed the answer. I don't know how to explain it, but for example, you said, all of these things came out of necessity. And then you said, well, maybe it's not necessity. It's because I'm really impatient. But then you went back to, but this could have come really from my home life where maybe it was a necessity for you. So it's weird how that whole answer came full circle where, well, because I know you, your first answer of it comes from a necessity. I was like, no, it's not a necessity. It's because you're impatient. And then and your lack of patience for inefficiency. So I don't think it's not a necessity because there's a lot of things that are necessary to do and people don't do them. That's not a motivating factor. But there's something where you just don't like inefficiency, and maybe because of, you know, and maybe chaotic is not the right term for your home life, but both of your parents are such high energy, but disorganized individuals. So I could see how then, it is a necessity for you then to become how you became.
Yeah.
So does it make sense where I went there?
I guess so. I think it's funny because I don't know that I have really thought about it in this way before. So I'm glad we're having the conversation, especially since I'm focused on kind of recounting a lot of my life story and kind of just trying to make sure I'm documenting before I completely forget everything. So I think back, and I don't want listeners to get the wrong impression. I came from a very loving home in which it was chaotic in a sense that just like the Wallum world is, we always have a show, we always have an event, we always have a tournament, we always have a next thing. I decide I'm going to be Make Us Visible Florida's director and do advocacy, and my students get dragged along with it. And now we have advocacy events to run, or, you know, this to go to, or something is always happening. And my mom was in a reggae band, so we would go to nightclubs when I was like 10, you know, like there was always things happening. But even like on a daily basis, watching my dad make dinner, he did it in like 10 minutes, right? And so everything was a rush. Everything was go, go, go. Everything was always very intense, right? I don't look back and think, oh, you know, I had a really relaxing, quiet home life. Like getting home was my quiet time. I don't feel like I had quiet time ever, really, right? Like every time the tempo was crazy, home was like really busy. And so I think my room was my place of privacy and solace, right? So it would always have to be a very specific way. I liked it to be very particular. And I think it was like what we just said, out of necessity of like, maybe because everything else I felt so much, instability is the wrong word, but didn't have the ability to kind of just sit in quiet for a minute. Like the TV was always on, or someone was on the phone, or there was loud conversation. Like it was a boisterous environment. And it's not a negative thing. Like I said, it was a very loving home, and it wasn't like, there are times in our house with you and I where it could be completely quiet. Like people would think no one's here. We don't have to have the TV on. Like you and I could go and the TV could just maybe not be on all day, and that would be fine. We're just working, doing our own thing. Or you could be meditating or out in the garden for 2 hours, digging in dirt or whatever it is you like to do out there. But, you know, so I feel like it's shaped a lot of who I am. And I think that because of Kung Fu, it instilled in me this like always striving for excellence. And in my mind, that gets translated in different ways. So excellence could be doing really well in a form at a tournament. Excellence could be straight A's in school. Even though I say my parents demanded that, honestly, I'm not really sure it was so, like my dad doesn't know what grades are really, you know, and my mom, she comes from Jamaica, so her British system was always very different. And so the numbers and stuff didn't always matter. But I mean, I know there was an expectation for me to do well, but I really think I always put that expectation on myself, right? So I was upset if I didn't get better grades. Like I would put that pressure probably more on me than even my parents. But like Kung Fu kind of makes you strive for excellence in every area. So I would even apply that to like today, right? Like going to the grocery store, I have to be the most efficient. I want to make sure that I don't go back and forth between the aisles, that everything is maximized for time, but also because I feel like I don't have enough time. So I think there's a number of things happening and why my brain processes the way it does and why I feel like even in my house, like I don't want to make 2 trips to the laundry room. I want to get everything I need to get out of the room and then bring it at once. And it's just like every second of the day is precious to me. And so, yeah, I don't know if that really is tangenting from the original question.
No, I think this all is answering.
Listeners are like totally like, okay, we're going to check out on this one.
No,
I do not know what she's talking about.
All of this answers my question, which, I kind of had something on here as well. It was like, what do you attribute your ability to process so quickly? So I remember a doctor who now in 2023, he must be almost 90 years old. But I called on him when I was a drug rep, and we were both from Brooklyn. And he said something that's always stuck with me, which is, well, when you grow up in Brooklyn, when you grow up in New York, in a city like that, you have this tendency that when you come to a corner, you slow down. So that people think of New Yorkers as like, oh, I'm moving really fast. But when you're in that type of environment, you actually are moving cautiously. And I observed, like even when we were in Miami just recently, you walk head down, forward, sometimes to your detriment, where you bump into things. So you don't necessarily slow down. You just proceed with action. And I don't process that way. I process with like, oh, if I need to do something, let me think about it first. So this is another skill that you have, which is if something needs to get done, you're able to take in that information, process it, and then be already doing the action in a very quick amount of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, and I it's a skill that at one of the instructor meetings we were talking about recently, where one of the instructors and I were saying, listen, we can't, when you say, hey, I need you to do this thing, you need to give me like a week heads notice because I need to think about how I can do it the best. And that's the way that my brain works. And you're more of like, no, you're going to do it in 5 minutes and then it gets done. And usually what gets done really well. Maybe it's not the best it could possibly get done, but it still gets done effectively and efficiently. So all your answers to all that gives me and maybe people who are listening more insight onto, oh, this is maybe one of the reasons why you're able to process so quickly, but I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think that, again, I've had a very unique upbringing, and I know everybody thinks they have a unique upbringing, but if you've ever met either of my parents, I mean, a lot of this is, oh, Grandmaster Chan, but my mom has had a very fascinating and interesting life as well that adds such a different dynamic to the Kung Fu world, being in music, growing up around music, and having 28 first cousins. So you talk about family dinner, and it's not, at Christmas time, it's over 150 people in the house, right? It's not, and for a very long time, like that doesn't happen anymore because we can't handle that. But like for years, when I would go over to friends' houses and they're like, oh, it's my birthday. And, it's a very nice birthday, but it is not 150 people running around. Like that's a wedding, right? That's somebody's fancy wedding where it's just, they're not fancy, sorry, like a big gathering, right? It was never fancy. It's just, I think I come from a world where there's always so much going on that if you are unable to keep up, you get left behind. And in ways I've said this before, the reason I hate being late, one is I want to respect whoever it is we're meeting. I want to respect the theater and the performers or the person we're meeting for dinner. It's a show of respect to be on time. That's just number one. That's a Kung Fu, like you respect the classroom, you show up on time. But number two, my dad would leave us like physically get in the car and leave if we were late. So it's a very quick lesson to learn. And like, no, we do not be late. Now I have to admit, since I've been with you, we often run late.
Geez, so what is the new data point that came in that causes this?
I'm not blaming you. I'm saying that my ability to maintain that standard has gone down. I take full extreme ownership on that. There's a lot there, but this actually goes to one of the things that I heard that made me even want to ask you about is sometimes I hear a quote and I'm like, wow, that quote was so interesting. And a lot of times it makes me think of you or maybe your parents. And here's the quote. It's this author named Adam Gopnik. He had a quote about his father where he said, my father is so gently competent, but he was using kind of this example of driving, like his dad was just this amazing driver. Mm-hmm. And the author didn't learn how to drive because he grew up in New York until he was in his middle age, I believe, as an older adult. But this is the actual quote that I wanted to say and then get your thoughts on, because it makes me think of your relationship with your father, but maybe not even your father, because your mom is her own like force of nature. Mm-hmm. And maybe if she hadn't married Grandmaster Chan and then decided, oh, we're going to make Wallom Kung Fu our life, she could have had her own something separate. Like she's still she's a well-accomplished Tai Chi master, right? But anyway, that's besides the point. Here's the quote. The quote is, we all make ourselves a little bit in the shadows of our father's accomplishments, but are also bending away from the shadow into our own sunshine. My father was so super competent in all of those ways, those little ways, that I made myself notably incompetent in the little tasks of life. I thought that was such a cool quote, but it makes me, these are the question really that came from it, is like more of like, so what are those little tasks of life that your father is so competent in and you aren't? Because we all know, he's Kung Fu master, but there's a lot of things that he's really, really good at that are maybe some would consider these are like little minor tasks, and you're not good at those things. Right. There's so many, to be honest. Mm-hmm. One is that you and I call him the Chinese MacGyver. And this is the type of thing where you go, okay, if you're stranded on a deserted island, could you survive? And I'm thinking I would die. I don't know that. Well, one, nature would kill me. Probably first and foremost, if not a shark.
As soon as Zyrtec ran out, you're done for.
As soon as Zyrtec ran out, I think nature would have its way. So that's besides the point. I am not blessed with the immune system of being, unable to withstand pollen and things like that. But he has an ability to, even something as simple as sewing, right? Because he can sew, he can fix a lot of things, because maybe the act of knowing how to stitch something together, he has fixed Tina's shoes live while her shoelaces broke when we were walking in the Bahamas with floss. I don't know if you remember this, but of course he had floss.
Of course I remember, because I think the floss was a different color. So it was like her shoes were like
with like green floss. And it's hilarious, but then at the same time, he couldn't put together like my bike as a child, right? Because there's instructions. Because there's instructions and there's a certain method to doing it. So he's not handy in that way where it's like, let me fix these things around the house. But he has survival skills that obviously, I mean, the man swam here from a boat and escaped and all these things. So he clearly has survival skills. But when we talk about the little things like sewing, or his intuitiveness to things like Chinese medicine. Because just the other day, we were talking about Ditajiao and medicine and herbs. And then I was like, well, but how did you learn that? So, because for me, I guess there are things that come naturally to me, maybe, right? But like for me, I wouldn't really know where to start with that. Like, oh, let me go pick up this tree bark and this thing and put it together. And that makes sense. Like, I feel like his awareness of his body and how to fix it for himself, he's able to then take that and apply that to knowing how to do Chinese medicine, and then talking to people and asking the right questions to get those answers, right? So I think besides the fact that his level of Kung Fu and the way in which his brain works for Kung Fu is kind of unlike any other, that's a whole nother episode and conversation, I think. But I really think it's his, like, those small survival skills that add up that I certainly do not have.
So then do you think, this doesn't have to do with you, but I just like the way that this person put these words together, which is, my father was super competent in those ways, so I made myself notably incompetent in those little tasks. Do you find that's true with you? Like that you made yourself incompetent with certain of those things because your father was so competent?
Because I rely on him to do them, perhaps? And
maybe, I don't know. It's the cool thing with something like that is you can take it to mean whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think maybe if I had more time to really sit down and go, okay, here are more things, like a full listing, I could probably go yes and no. But for example, he's a fantastic chef. And when I lived at home, I didn't cook ever. So one would think,
and now, let me just finish your sentence for you. Your skills in the kitchen are dope. So,
and do you know why? Out of necessity, because my husband loves to eat home cooked food.
I think that, and also you just don't like being inefficient or doing things that are subpar.
Yeah.
Okay, so
this comes back to the original question. It's like, why do I do things the way I do them? Because I want to strive for excellence in almost everything I do. You know, it's just, and I don't like inefficiency. And
so, okay, another part of this quote.
Okay.
How do you think you're making yourself a bit in the shadow of your father's accomplishments, right? I think that one's kind of easy, right? Because you're taking over the Wallem system.
But I've done it in a different way than he did, right? Because I use technology, and maybe it's because he put this in my head. He always said, I start Kung Fu, I started everything here, and you will take it with your new world, he calls it, which means computers and technology and all these things that he didn't get a chance to understand. So the reverse of the question is really easy for me because he always points out the things that he can't do, like reading and writing and English and computers and those types of things. But he was so resourceful because the man never took a driver's license test, but he has a driver's liceness. I'll let everyone think about that for a second.
Good news is he's not driving. Don't worry.
Now everybody. You are a chauffeur. So, but I'm saying, right? So that's about being resourceful, right? So for sure, those are the ways in which I'm taking what he's established, and like he planted the seed, he even grew the tree, and then I'm continuing that growth, but I think I'm also trying to make it a forest.
Right. So that's that first part of we make ourselves a bit in the shadows of our fathers or parents' accomplishments. But the other part of that quote, which is really cool, is we also then at the same time are bending away from the shadow towards our own sunlight, our own sunshine.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that I did some film work, and I mean, he did some film work too, but even the fact that I'm doing Make Us Visible Florida and advocacy and all the principles he taught me, right? These are the things that he actually encouraged, which is education, helping people who weren't able to maybe help themselves or didn't have somebody to advocate for them and fight for them. And those are things that we say on the altar every day, right? And it's just so, the martial arts altar, for those listening for the first time or have no idea what I'm talking about, we have philosophy, which is like learning respect and kindness and fellowship and hard work and patience and control for ourselves. So I think, like I said, he set in this foundation, instilled so much of the what's the word I'm looking for, but the characteristics of who you should be as a person, like what makes you a good human or a good martial artist, right? And then how can that be carried forward? We always talk about Kung Fu meaning hard work, but that doesn't mean you just do Kung Fu in the classroom, that you're just kicking and punching and you work hard there. That means you apply that to everything. Our Kung Fu pod that we do for YouTube, it's like, how can we apply this to our daily lives? And so for me, advocacy isn't really far away from that. To be able to be a martial artist, you almost goes hand in hand. Like that is to be an advocate for society, especially marginalized communities. So, but he never like started an organization or foundation or anything to do anything beyond. But he started opening the doors of Chinese martial arts to anybody who's not Asian, right? He opened doors and did things in a different way. So like one could see a lot of his actions as very social justice oriented. It just wasn't so formalized as maybe what I'm doing now. But yeah, so I think it's interesting because like you said, it's like the shadow of which, but then kind of growing my own.
Right. Like at first you need to grow in the shadow, but then you're bending towards your own sunshine.
Yeah.
And so this is now, hold this thought right here, because I'm just going to bring this back to when we were talking about your goal for eventually getting that work-life balance to be 80-20.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that. I think it's always going to be 60-40 because you have to be doing something. You don't have to answer that. But I just think that you'll always be doing something like that. That may be genetic. I don't know. That may be genetic. But as far as bending towards your own sunshine, we disagree on something.
Okay.
Do you know what it is?
Tell me. Dígame.
Dígame. Escucha las palabras. Okay. You think you're an introvert, and I don't think you're an introvert.
Okay.
Because I see you, to use the sunshine, like thriving in the light. And so if we think back to our earlier part in this conversation where I could see, well, man, it's like a whirlwind with your dad, with your mom, with all positive, but it's still a whirlwind, that I could see why you would need some downtime. But I think of an introvert as someone who thrives in the quiet time, and I see you thriving not in the quiet time.
So I think this becomes a definition of word, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the question I originally heard, maybe through psychology class or something way back when, is like, if you would rather be home in a small setting with one or two people, or would you rather be out at a club or with a lot of people or at a party? Like, what is your idea of a fun evening? And mine would be the first, which is I want to be home, like in a quieter setting. I also would say, if you look at a lot of actors, you're going to go, oh, they're all extroverted, but that's not true. They're performers. So I think I'm a performer, 100%. 100% I'm a performer. I like to be on stage, and I do like to give public speeches because I feel like I am sufficient at it enough to where I can bring value to my audience. But I don't think introvert and extrovert means the same thing to me as it means to you. I think there's a difference in opinion there. Okay. Am I a social person? Yes. But I think in my mind, when I'm asked the question, where do I prefer to be? It's like, I would rather being at home, maybe with one or two people. I don't prefer a larger party. Like, I can't even eat, for example, even at our events. Like, any event we have, I can't eat at those functions. So I don't eat for several hours. But when we go out to dinner at the end of the night, I can really enjoy myself when it's just one or two or three of us. So that's why I consider myself to be naturally introverted, but I'm 100% a performer. But it is a skill I've also acquired since I was 3 years old, performing. So I'm comfortable because I'm practiced.
Right. Yeah, I could see that, how it would be the definition. And I don't think it has to be set in stone what the definition is. It could be...
Yeah, but this is where I think the reason we may disagree is because we're defining it differently.
Yeah. And that's probably why most people disagree on anything. Right.
100%.
Okay, so help me.
You think you're an introvert for sure.
I think so.
Yes,
I
would agree, but I would say you also thrive when you also thrive in a sense of that you're very good at it. You're very good at talking to people, and you are also very good when you are lecturing. I don't think you enjoy maybe performing Kung Fu that much, but you love being in the lion, and you do love like getting up there and doing your fitness talks. Like, you are in your element there.
Yeah, I guess the reason I consider myself an introvert is because I think all of that, I can enjoy it and maybe have worked hard to improve myself in it, but I don't get energy from it. I find it almost instantaneously, as soon as it's done, exhausting.
Well, I'm exhausted.
I don't ride a high necessarily.
Yeah, I'm definitely exhausted.
Yeah.
It takes me days to recover now from something than it used to. So I am definitely exhausted, but interesting.
Yeah. How about this one here? This is one I just thought of just now. Help me and
help me help you.
Other men, or really anyone who's in a relationship, which is this is a discussion I heard from Adam Grant and this soccer star. Her name is Abby Wambach. They say she's like the greatest soccer player of all time.
Wow.
She was like, U.S. Women's Olympic soccer, multiple gold medals. Anyway.
And we love Adam Grant.
It's like, and it's like, how do we know when you just need to vent or when you are actually seeking a solution? Because it's something that I think, I don't know, you know me, you could tell me, I don't think that I vent a lot, but maybe I do, right? I probably vent about certain things, but God, I probably vent a lot now that I said it out loud. But I feel like sometimes you don't have a problem coming to me and talking about a situation, and I sometimes don't know, okay, is she asking for me to help her with her solution, or does she just need to vent? Like, how are we going to know when to do that, right?
Well,
because in that discussion, I think it was the soccer player Abby Wambach who said, "Well, figuring things out is actually valuable work. I just need to vent there. Don't give me the answer because I need to figure that out, and don't take that away from me. There's a lot of value in me figuring that out. I just needed to vent." And I was like, all right. I heard that and I was like, all right, damn it. So am I giving advice when I need to give advice? How am I? Well, I should have ended with like, how am I supposed to know when?
First, who, when, how? Okay. First of all, we are not here to give relationship advice, listeners. So this is very specific to Oscar and I, but we've known each other since 1996. So I feel like we operate on a very different level than maybe someone who's only known each other a couple of years. I'm not diminishing anyone else's ability to know their partner, but time really does tell a lot of things, right? It gives you a lot of insight into nuances, into body language, into words, into emotion, all of it, right? And so I feel you instinctually know because you always go, you're just talking this out right now, right? Like you don't actually need me to answer you. You actually ask that. So that's the first part. So males or counterparts, if you're the male or female in this, I don't think it really matters because I think this could go for either side. So if you're the one listening to this, if it helps, go ahead and ask the question. But also the person venting, I think what's helpful is, I'm just going to be venting right now. I just need to complain. You don't need to respond, but blah, 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 and then go. I think it's helpful to maybe preface it with, hey, this is what's happening right now, or if you can't even get that out because you just have it on top of mind, just hold your finger up. And then at the end of it, go, that's it. I don't need a response. I just need you to be able to say that out loud. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay.
And that's it.
That's actually
But
really
I
helpful.
honestly think that you instinctually always say to me, so, for example, whenever I'm planning a trip, I go, okay, so we're going to go down to this street. We have 2 contingencies for dinner. Do we want to do this contingency or this one? Because granted, of course, I always know the first dinner option. It's the second and third one that I want to talk out. And you usually say, you're just talking this through, right? You're just kind of going through the out loud motions and you don't need me to actually respond. And sometimes I'll say yes. And sometimes I'll say, no, I want your opinion. Do you want to eat ceviche or do you want chicken? I'll just ask you.
Okay. Actually, that's good to know, like, on both ends. So both.
Yeah. Whoever's the venter and whoever is the one listening. Yeah. I think it's okay for either to ask a question or preface or something. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that just comes back to like being a good communicator.
So this next thing is a quick question, but I'm going to tee it up with a really long preface.
Oh, okay.
This is my
I'm going to lay back down now
down.
to do my stretch. By the way, listeners, I am doing, what is this stretch?
I would say it's kind of like a glute stretch. Some people call it like a figure 4 on your back.
Right. Yes, I'm doing that because it feels good.
It's good for the outside of the hip. A lot of these questions, it's weird. I get in a rut, or not a rut. What is it? I get on this thing where I listen to one person over and over again. So there's times where I'm like, oh, I'm on like a straight up Peter Attia kick, and I'm just listening to medical stuff. But I've been on an Adam Grant podcast kick. And the reason that I like it so much is because it's rare that I listen to a podcast and have questions or want to take notes all the time. There's a lot of times I listen to podcasts and I go, wow, that was really cool. But I don't always listen to a podcast and go, let me write that down. That was really interesting.
Really?
Okay. I do it probably more.
I feel like you have a lot of notes all the time.
Okay. I probably
Listeners, anytime there is a subject of any kind, and any of our kids, and when I say kids, not our biological ones, our kung fu ones, which at this point might as well be sometimes our biological ones. We love them dearly, and we definitely take care of them. But he always says, well, I heard a podcast, and then he pulls up notes on this, from the podcast.
So maybe I do it more than usual, but I've been doing it so much with this one where I'm like, wow. So I don't know. It could be just my brain right now in summer of 2023 is attuned to this, right? But the question is, how about this? You are pretty much running the Wallem system.
Yes.
Right? And also have had this leadership role for a long time as a woman in martial arts. So I'm assuming that there's probably a lot of people who wanted to give you advice throughout the years. And maybe you've gotten a lot of advice. So the question is, what is the worst advice you have ever gotten? Adam Grant asked that in his thing. And let me tee it up with you with what ended up being like similar answers from two different people on two different shows. And it's one of them being Steve Martin, who's freaking hilarious. But he said, especially when you're young, don't try to be yourself as a recipe for authenticity. Don't be authentic when you are young. He says that, like, if someone would say, hey, be authentic when he was young, it'd be like, what? That just means like me sitting and watching TV if I'm being my authentic self. When you're young, you don't even know who you are. So you should model yourself after someone who is effective in that situation. And then you step into that role. So there's this logic and impersonation, especially when you're in a panic. You don't have to be your best self. You instead can think of, well, what would a role model do in that situation? And you would find your authentic self by imitating other people. Then through this process of osmosis and internalizing their sound, suddenly you will wake up one day and realize that you sound like no one else. You sound like you. So his worst advice is when people say, just be yourself. And I thought the answer, like instinctively, I was like, what? No, I want to be myself. Like, I think in my 30s, I was like that, right? And I was like, no, I like the way he explained why that's bad advice. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I teed that up. You can use that as bad advice maybe that you've gotten, but I don't know if there's something that came to mind.
I don't know that anyone's ever told me to be myself.
Right. So maybe that's not.
So maybe that says something.
But is there something that came to mind with like, oh, this was horrible advice that I got?
Oh gosh, nothing so specific. Like I wish I had something really clever to say. Not clever, but like insightful right off the top of my head. But I think more than anything was repetitively people telling me, and it's not a very specific thing I have to say, but like things I already knew, or like more questioning me all the time, right? If I were going to, I don't know, run a tournament a certain way or put on a show a certain way, or I wanted to do this type of class structure or schedule. I think it was more that I was questioned so much along the way. And I'm sure there was unsolicited advice, like, because once you get questioned, then you usually get, well, you should do it this way.
Right.
So my thing is usually like, half the time, pretty sure those people were wrong because my way seemed pretty damn effective. And not to say I didn't take good advice. I think I would only usually value advice from those that had shown me by proof of action that they knew what they were talking about. But I will also say, and this is, I don't know if this is going to get misunderstood, but because I was who I was for as long as I was, I've always been the daughter of Grandmaster Chan. I think people were always looking to take advantage of me in a certain way or gain my favor by befriending me to get close to my dad or be seen as, oh, we're really, we take care of Mimi, or we're looking out for her, or we're trying to help her. So I want to be seen in a certain way by Grandmaster Chan. Right.
So what I think you're saying is bad advice came from people who probably didn't know all the things we talked about earlier, which were your really amazing skill set for logistics planning, checklists, strategizing, implementation, like all those skills that you have, and you're getting advice from people that you knew didn't have those skills. So then probably was going to be ineffective. Is that one way you think it?
I guess a great example would be, I'm trying to think further back, because it's like once I had already proven myself, proven meaning I've, let's say, grown the kids class to, double the amount of students, or we put on a really great show this year. And then the next year we're putting on a show, and my goal is always to make things better, but people have forgotten the year before that I have already done this already. And so I get questioned a lot, like, oh, are you sure you know what you're doing? Right, as if I've never done this ever, right? Or it's like my first Chinese New Year. Like I've never done Chinese New Year before or something, right? And so I think it really becomes more of a constantly being underestimated. And when is it that I have to stop proving myself that I know what I'm doing?
So
I think that's the biggest thing. I'm constantly even today, constantly underestimated by peers may not say it out loud necessarily, but less so peers, and like not by my Kung Fu brothers or anything, but I would even say let's say across the board in the industry or outside looking in.
So this answers the question, because the question is, well, what's the worst advice you had ever gotten? And the answer would be something that would be you giving advice to someone, right? And so what I'm hearing is that your advice is that if you're in a position to be a role model for someone, or to be in that position to maybe give someone advice, is be more encouraging. Trust that a lot of times that people know what they're doing. Like, do your due diligence before you give advice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. That would be, if you're asking me, like, how can I give advice to somebody who is in either a work environment or something, and they want to be able to contribute better to a team or to peers. And yeah, absolutely. I think do your due diligence would be great, because it really makes no sense to, not that you shouldn't question people, right? But it doesn't make sense when there's a really good track record. Right. And then you say, hey, are you sure you know how to do this? Because really all it does is, and this sounds harsh, but make you look like an idiot. Right.
So if you're in the position to be the advice giver, do your homework when you're giving that advice. And I think this is something that I struggle with. I try to question myself a lot, is not to give advice when it's my first instinct to someone who is maybe younger or less experienced than me. Because I don't want to come across as being that person. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard because we're mentors, we're teachers. So our initial instinct is always to just go, hey, let me just tell you. Because when I was your age, blah, blah, blah.
And they're all their own individual people.
Yeah. And it's not to say that people can't give me advice on something I've already done, because there are better ways to do things. Right. But I'm always looking for the expert in that area. Like, the Da Sheng Mao of the group. I'm like, I don't want to have to figure out how to build this thing, or I don't want to have to figure out how to fix this thing. Let me go to the expert in that. And so I think because in my mind, I always go and seek out expertise in areas I know I'm not sufficient in or don't understand. I feel like, okay, if I am the expert in this, not that you shouldn't question me or give me advice, but maybe give me the benefit, work with, and then you can offer up ideas, right?
So maybe there's a difference. Someone, let's say it's a conversation on something that's your skill set, maybe don't question the actions, but it could be, well, how is this affecting your energy or your attitude? Maybe that might be better advice.
Context and tone is everything too.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
So how about this? The other thing that was on there as far as really bad advice, which I thought was similar, was someone said, well, you can do anything or you can be anything. And this guy was like, that's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. It's much better to say, you know what, if you work really hard, you have a higher probability of accomplishing that task as opposed to you can do anything.
Yeah,
and I think I might have gotten the bad advice when I was younger because I was a good student, in a comparative
Well, you were
context.
told you were really smart.
Right. And I think it probably would have been better to say, you know what is that you like doing? Okay, if you want to be good at that, I think you have the high probability of accomplishing that because you're a hard worker. Yeah. Like that's better advice than you can be anything. Anyway. Thinking of that book, Think Again, since we both read Adam Grant's Think Again, is there anything recently that you've rethought? Like, to me, that first piece of advice of be yourself is something I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, that reframe was great, just because. But again, this is where context and digging further into how you define that. Right, because when you say be yourself, that's kind of like, oh, just kind of being like authentic to who you are versus trying to pretend to be like your friends or fitting in or peer pressure, right? So it depends. Context and how you define things, I think, is everything, which is interesting that has come up. But there's a lot of reframes. I mean, I want to say it happens almost on a daily basis because I'm always looking for, if something's not going well, I'm like, okay, let me go to the flip side. Why is this? How can we improve this? I mean, just because it's fresh off the top of my mind, we just passed this legislation with API history bill in Florida. And I think 4 years ago, I would never have imagined that I would have sat across from so many Republicans and had so many civil conversations. And there had to be a think again on how I viewed having these conversations, because I feel like I was a very no-go. Like, we don't align with all of these things, so there's no way I can work with these people kind of thing, right? And immediately when you say something like these people, that's already a bad start because you're grouping in so much into one bucket, right? You're just pigeonholing yourself right then and there, right? And so I would never have gotten this bill passed had I had a closed mind like I did before, where I felt so strongly. And I think it's because of the you-know-who era that caused, thou that we shall say his name, that caused us to just have such a adverse reaction and going, no, we have to draw this thick line in the sand and you're either on this side or you're on this side. And it's like, wow, that was bad for everybody, right? And so going to Tallahassee, going to those legislators, being able to sit with them as human beings and going, wow, we really, really disagree on so many different things. But if we can agree on this one and advance that forward and make progress, isn't that good? Isn't that worth it? Isn't that worth having this conversation? I think a few years ago, I would never even imagined I would be doing that at all. But now that I had a different goal, I had to rethink that, and I had to kind of approach that from a completely different place, which was not easy, but it was, two things can be true. And then I've learned the flip side of that. Because I've done this good thing, people are angry that we worked with people they disagree with. But it's like, oh, so should we just not make progress ever, right? But two things can be true. Bill A could be good and Bill B could be bad, and they could both pass, but it doesn't mean one negates the other, right? Like, they're just two things can be true at the same time. Yep. And I've really felt that from both sides now, from, each side of it, where I would have been the person that was maybe criticizing things in the past. Right.
Yeah, that's actually a really good thing to rethink. Okay, so to wrap things up, 3 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay.
Well, maybe not. They don't have to be rapid fire. I mean, we make our own rules here, damn it.
My brain.
What is an attribute that you need to work on? I'll give you my thought. Your problem is that you care too much. I think you need to work on that. But I don't know if you want to steal that You can if you want, though, since it's rapid fire.
I don't think it's that. I mean, I think it goes back to my impatience.
Okay. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word adversarial? Fables?
Actually, why did you say that? Because I was kind of thinking, immediately there's that picture in Fables, which listeners, if you don't know, is a comic book. And it's like the big, giant drawing where it's like this, it's like almost like a giant or something because it's like this
the
toilet.
Adversary.
Yeah, it's the adversary. Anyway.
Was that the first thought that came to mind?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, good. I wanted to give you an out there. Okay. What is something that you believe?
Well, wait. Okay. Before, it's just too easy to go to the two political people that I can't stand right now. So
yeah.
It's just too easy to do that. And it's like kind of throwaway.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I know. That's easy. So what's something you believe but you know is unreasonable? For example, just today you mentioned that it's completely unreasonable that you're still upset that Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman are divorced because you like them so much based on movies and interviews and you've never met them. Like, that's completely unreasonable how upset you are about them being divorced. But what's something else that's completely unreasonable? I love that
you wrote that down when you mentioned there was a really great Ethan Hawke TED Talk. And I was like, oh, I love Ethan Hawke. Following, we talked about this movie Tape, very obscure indie film. And I was like, oh gosh, I love both him and Uma Thurman as actors. And it makes no sense at all that their relationship in any way should have any, I should have zero interest in it because I know neither of them is humans. But yes. Sorry, what's the actual question?
Watch that TED Talk, by the way. It's give yourself permission to be creative. But
yes,
the actual question is, what's something that you believe but you know is unreasonable? You got to have a bunch of these. I mean, come on.
That's the problem. There's so many things that my brain is like, which one do I pick?
Just don't overthink it. Just go for it.
I think it's a little bit deeper, right? So I think it's just that people may not believe this about me, and it may be like, okay, I don't believe you, but I do have some self-esteem issues when it comes to body image, and maybe I'm not like huge on weight necessarily, but I feel like I will unreasonably say things like, I don't use the word overweight, so to speak, but like how I look or how I feel about myself. And I know that this is unreasonable. And that's probably one of the most unhealthy things I would say that I struggle with.
That's a very good answer. Well, Mimi, thank you for, doing the Oscar Ask Mimi Anything episode.
And so perhaps if listeners care to contribute to this, we might actually get to your question, because I don't know that we really got to any of Oscars. We tangented so much from the get-go.
I think we got through a few of them.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we did. The bulk of it was not planned.
That's okay. That's how this podcast is.
I guess how it goes. But I don't know. I guess it's up to people who listen to tell you whether they're like, dear God,
get them off the mic.
Do not do that again. But on my end, it's funny because we would have conversations like this anyway. Maybe not so structured.
Yes.
Because it would be kind of silly if just unprompted I was like, okay, let me bring out my notes, Mimi.
I don't know. I feel like in some ways we do this. So yeah, it's like a window for everybody into the world of Oscar and Mimi's house. So, well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
Take us home. You wrap this up. I don't know how to wrap it up.
Well, why don't you give it a try? You're the host today.
Mimi Chan, thank you so much for your time today. I had such a great time. And I learned so much. I took a bunch of notes. And I think that our listeners learned a lot too.
Thanks so much. Next time.
Bye.
Bye.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.